Good evening, and welcome to Simple Truth. Jesus tells us that we are to come to him like little children. And when I think about that, what I think of is that little children, they believe what they are told. And they believe what they are told because they believe in who is telling them. When I was in second grade, my family moved to a different school district and I got a new teacher. And I came home and my mom could tell that I was a little perplexed, for whatever that means as a second grader. And so she asked me what was wrong. And, I shared with her that my teacher told me that she was 92 years old. And when my mom asked me what I thought about that, I thought that she didn't look a day over 70. You see, I had a point of reference for 70 because I had my grandparents and other people around me at church. But when it came to 92, I had no reference for that. And so I believed her, though, because that's what she told me. Well, it turns out that she wasn't 92, and she wasn't even 70. But the truth is, I believed her because that's what she told me, and I believed in her because she was my teacher. When we think of simply coming to Jesus, it's with that in mind, that we believe that Jesus is who he says he is. Therefore, what he tells us, we can believe. That's super important in our relationship with Jesus. Before we get into this whole idea of walking out our journey with Jesus, we really need to back up and really decide whether or not we are in relationship with Jesus. You see, we're in Easter, and at Easter time, we see a bunch of people and groups of people who encounter Jesus. Now, again, throughout the journey of Jesus, for his 3 years of ministry that we have in the Gospels, we see Jesus encountering people all the time. But what we see is different options for what happens with that encounter. You see, there are some who, because of need or just because of want, they embrace Jesus. They embrace who he is. And therefore, they believe what he says. There are still others who they listen to what Jesus says, but because they don't believe in him, they're questioning, is he who he really says he is? They tend to put Jesus on the shelf for a minute. And then there is the third group who they listen to Jesus and they simply have come up with the conclusion that Jesus isn't who he says he is. We do that same thing. You and I are faced every day with an encounter with Jesus. Today, this day, are you going to believe that Jesus is who he says he is? And therefore he can do what he says he can do in your life? Or are you the type of person who says, I think maybe Jesus is who he says he is, and I think maybe he can do what he can do, but you know what? I'm going to deal with that at a different moment, and I'm going to run my own life for now and see how that works out, and maybe if I need him along the way, I'll call upon him. That works out as long as the end of your journey doesn't come sooner than you would like it to. You see, the one thing that we know is God is in charge of the beginning of your journey. That start date that is going to be on your gravestone, that little dash, well, God's also in charge of that as well, because he's in charge of the end date. And so we're not really sure what's going to happen. So when you decide to put Jesus on the shelf and maybe come to him at a later time, deal with this at a later moment, well, then you're deciding to gamble that end date there on that gravestone, that it's not going to come too soon. Still others have decided, for whatever the reason, that they just do not believe that Jesus is who he says he is, and that he's going to do what he says he can do. Maybe that's through experience, that they asked him for something as a child, as a youth, as an adult, and it didn't come through the way that they wanted to. So they've decided that they're not going to believe in Jesus. But one thing we do know for certain, and that is that each one of us has an encounter with Jesus and has to figure out what we're going to do with him. And you see, Jesus tells us to come simply to him. But too often we make life complex. Now, again, The simple truth about the complexity of life is that we do that a lot of times to differentiate ourselves from other people. We are a culture that worships knowledge. The more that I know, the more I can distance myself from other people. And we've gone so far as I can know a lot of things and have never experienced them and still be considered an expert in that area. Jesus says, when it comes to him, there is no complexity. It's pretty simple. That we are to embrace our encounter with him, to drash out our relationship with him, to bring to him the questions, the hurts, the thoughts, the concerns that we have, and to decide whether we want to be in relationship with him. And then, because we've done all of that, we can determine that, you know what? We do believe that he is who he says he is. And therefore he can do what he says he can do. So this Easter season, it's pretty simple. Have you had your encounter with Jesus? What have you done with Jesus? And are you willing to come to him simply? No preconceived ideas, no grocery lists. He's not a vending machine. He simply wants you to be in relationship with him. Join us next time for another Simple Truth.